In this lesson, we are given two equations and we're asked to figure out what the remaining roots are. You can see from both of these graphs that we're also given the roots, either 1 or 2, based on the problem. And the roots that we're given are the ones that are obvious. So for example, on number 24, they show us that one of the roots is -3, which you can see the graph crosses at about -3, and the graph crosses at 4. So, in order to figure out the remaining roots, we want to think of a couple of things. One, because this on number 24 is a quartic function, meaning it is degree of 4, we know from the fundamental theorem of algebra that there are in fact 4 zeros. We know 2, we need to find 2. In order to find those 2, what we want to do is divide out those factors associated with the zeros we know to find the remaining quadratic that we can solve for the remaining zeros. So here we go. We're going to start by using the -3 and synthetic division. The coefficients are 1, -3, -8, 22, -24. Dropping the 1 times 3, -3, -6, +18, 10, -30. Let's see, that's 22, so -8 times 3, +24 is 0. Checks out. It definitely is a root. Now, we just factored out the x plus 3. That is the factor associated with the 0, -3. We're going to go ahead and keep going and factor out the factor associated with 4. That worked. So the factor associated with a +4 is x minus 4. So let's write what we've done so far. We've actually factored out x plus 3 and x minus 4. Then what's left over is what you see here for these coefficients. Since we've factored out divided out two linear terms, if you start with a quartic, a degree 4, and you do this twice, you're down to a quadratic. So this in case is going to be 1x squared, or just x squared, minus 2x plus 2. Well, you could try to factor this. I can tell you that that would be difficult, to say the least. Or you could apply that magic formula called the quadratic formula to solve this thing. Let's go ahead and do that. So, remember, the quadratic formula is x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And let's figure out what a and b and c are. A is the coefficient of the leading term, so a equals 1. B is the next term, so that's -2. And c is the constant, which is 2. Let's go ahead and put these into this quadratic formula and get our roots. Okay. So we're going to get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root b squared. Well, I'm actually going to take -2 times -2. Got to be real careful here. So that gives me a +4 minus 4 times 1 times 2, all divided by 2 times a, which is just 2. So I'm going to keep going here. If you look under the radical, you have 4 minus 8, which gives you a -4. So you have 2 plus or minus the square root of -4 over 2. Now, you might recall that the square root of a negative number is really an imaginary number. So factoring out the imaginary part, remember I equals the square root of -1. So I could write this as 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1 over 2. I'm really showing you all the steps here. Square root of 4 is 2. So I'm cross that out, make that a 2. And since I'm dividing everything by 2, I can reduce this. This turns into 1 plus or minus I. Let's try the second problem. They give us one root, that is x is negative 6, and since this is cubic, we're only going to have to do synthetic division once. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. Here we go. So we're going to have our root is negative 6. We're going to divide that 1, 6, 4, 24. 1, negative 6, 0, 0, 4, negative 24, 0. Okay, it worked. It is a 0. Now, what's left over are going to be the coefficients of a quadratic formula. So, if I'm going to write everything out, right now we've got x plus 6 times x squared. Now there's no middle term here, so it's really just plus 4. So this is what we've got, and we can use the quadratic to figure out what the solutions are to this factor x squared plus 4. A is 1, B is 0, and C is 4. Let's change colors. It's getting a little busy over here. So, x equals negative b. So in this case, it's just 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, that's just 0, minus 4 times a times c, which is 4, all over 2 times a. So that's just 2. So our x equals plus or minus negative 4 times 4 is negative 16, so square root of negative 16 all over 2. Almost done. Well, again, we've got the square root of a negative number, so we can factor out that square root of negative 1 and turn it into an I. So we've got x equals plus or minus the square root of 16 times I over 2, but the square root of 16 is just 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So x equals plus or minus 2